It wasn't easy, for sure. There were times when I just thought, I don't think I'm going to do this. I feel like I'm exposing myself. I'm saying too much.
For decades, Priscilla Presley said very little about the last time she and Elvis spoke. She protected that conversation fiercely, but people close to her knew she was holding something heavy. Then, one day, when the burden finally became too much, the walls came down, what she described was a memory she had never shared before. So, what did Elvis tell her? Let's find out. The weight of a final night in August in Memphis was always brutal. The heat pressed down on everything and everyone, and the air inside Graceland felt thick and still. The mansion that had once buzzed with energy and music now carried a different kind of atmosphere. Something had shifted in the weeks leading up to that night, and the people closest to Elvis could feel it without being able to name it. The house was quieter than usual, and Elvis himself was harder to reach. Elvis was preparing for another tour. The dates were set, the venues were booked, and everything on paper suggested that life was moving forward the way it always had. But anyone who spent time around him that summer knew that something was different. His body had been struggling for years, worn down by a schedule that never truly stopped, and by the private battles he fought when no one was watching. That August, those battles were written all over his face, and those around could see it. Priscilla had not lived at Graceland for years by that point. Their marriage had ended, and both of them had moved into separate lives, but the bond between them had never fully broken. She remained close to him in the way that only two people who had built a life together could understand. She knew his moods, his silences, and the particular manner in which he carried himself when something was weighing on him. And that summer, something was weighing on him heavily. The days before his passing were marked by restlessness. Elvis moved through the house in a confused and uncertain way, as though he was searching for something he could not find. He had always been a man of contagious energy, someone who filled every room he walked into. But that energy had dimmed. The people around him noticed the change, and there was an unspoken anxiety that ran beneath the surface of every interaction in that house during those final days. Lisa Marie was at Graceland that summer. She was young, and she moved through the house with the easy freedom of a child who had grown up in those rooms. For Elvis, she was the clearest and most uncomplicated source of joy in his life. He spent time with her the same way that fathers do when they feel the pull of something they cannot explain, staying close, watching her, as though storing up moments that he somehow sensed were running short. Meanwhile, Priscilla was aware of the tour that was about to begin. She knew the impact that touring had on Elvis, and she had watched over the years as each new run of shows left him a little more depleted than the last. The upcoming dates were weighing on people close to him, who could see plainly that he was not in the condition to be performing. But the machinery of his career had its own momentum, and it was not easily stopped. The night before he passed away, there was a phone call. It was not unusual for Elvis and Priscilla to speak on the phone. Instead, they had maintained a connection for the sake of Lisa Marie, and their conversations had settled into a pattern that was comfortable for both of them. But this particular call was different. Something in Elvis's voice that night had a quality that Priscilla would spend years trying to describe. It was slower, intentional, as though every word was being chosen carefully. The call lasted longer than most. Elvis spoke in a manner that was reflective, turning over the past and the life they had shared together. He was not angry or bitter. He was something closer to calm, but it was the kind of calm that comes after a long struggle, not before one. Priscilla listened, and as the conversation moved forward, she felt something shift inside her that she could not immediately explain. There was something final in his tone. But she did not know it was the last time she would ever speak to him. That is the cruelest part of final conversations. They do not announce themselves. They arrive wrapped in the ordinary, just like any other phone call, just another late evening exchange between two people who share a history. It was only later, when everything that followed had already happened, that the true weight of that night would begin to settle on her, and it would stay with her for decades to come. Elvis passed away the following day, found lifeless in his bathroom. Within hours, the news spread fast, and the world responded with a grief that was enormous and public. For Priscilla, the grief was something else entirely. It was private and layered, shaped by years of shared history, and by the particular memory of that final phone conversation. While the rest of the world mourned the performer, she mourned the man she had known in the personal and most private corners of his life. The night before he passed away, Graceland sat under the same heavy August sky it always had. The tour was still scheduled. Lisa Marie was still asleep somewhere in the house, and Elvis was still, for a few more hours, alive in the world. But something about that evening had already taken on the quality of an ending. It was there in the stillness of the house, in the slowness of his voice, and in the particular way the night refused to feel like any other night that had come before it. The deepest part of Elvis Presley. For a long time, Priscilla did not tell anyone the full details of that final conversation. She held it the way people hold things that are too large and too painful to carry in public. But over the years, pieces of what Elvis said that night began to surface, slowly and carefully, as she found the courage to speak about a moment that had never stopped living inside her. What emerged was a portrait of a man who, in his final hours, was reaching out across everything that had happened between them. Elvis did not call to talk about the tour. He did not bring up schedules or travel or the usual business of his life. Instead, he moved almost immediately into territory that was very much personal, the kind of conversation that does not happen between two people unless something beneath the surface is pushing it forward. He spoke about their life together, about the years they had shared, and about the way things had unfolded between them. His voice carried none of the defensiveness that had sometimes shaped their harder conversations in the past. He talked about the early years, the period before fame had fully consumed everything, when the two of them were still finding out who they were to each other. Those years had a texture that was different from everything that came after, and Elvis returned to them that night as though they held something important he needed to revisit. He spoke about what those times had meant to him, and about how clearly he could still see them, even from the distance of everything that had changed since. Priscilla listened without interrupting. She had learned over many years of knowing Elvis that there were moments when the only right thing to do was to be quiet and let him speak. And this was one of those moments. He was working something out as he talked, moving through his thoughts. Although it felt less like conversation and more like a kind of reckoning, she stayed with him in it, following the thread of what he was saying without trying to redirect or soften it. Elvis also spoke about Lisa Marie. This was normal. He talked about his daughter often and with an exciting feeling. But that night, the way he talked about her was different. There was a weight in it that went beyond ordinary fatherly pride or affection. He spoke about who she was, about the qualities he saw in her, and about the things he hoped for her future. He spoke about her as though he was assembling a picture he wanted to make sure existed somewhere outside of himself. And he went further by telling Priscilla things about his own interior life that she had rarely heard him say aloud. Elvis was not a man who found it easy to speak about his inner world. He had spent decades presenting a version of himself to the public that was larger than life. And even in private, he often kept the more vulnerable parts of himself behind a wall. But that night, some of that wall had come down. He spoke with an openness that caught her off guard. He talked about regret, not in a dramatic or self-pitying way, but with an honesty that was harder to hear than anger would have been. He spoke about choices he had made and things he wished had gone differently. He was not asking for forgiveness or making confessions. He was simply speaking the truth of his own life as he saw it. And he was speaking it to the one person who had been close enough to know exactly what he meant. He told her that she had mattered to him in many ways that nothing else had quite matched. Their relationship had been complicated, shaped by intense pressures and by the difficulty of two people trying to hold a marriage together inside the strange and distorting world that Elvis inhabited. But beneath all of that, there had been something genuine. He wanted her to know that he had never lost sight of it, even when everything around them had made it hard to see. Priscilla held all of this. She did not know how to respond to a conversation that felt like it was closing something. She did not reach for the easy reassurances that people sometimes offer when a conversation moves into difficult territory. She simply received what he was saying and stayed present with him in it. By the time the call ended, something between them had shifted, though she could not have said exactly what it was or why it felt so permanent. The words he spoke that night did not sound like the words of a man who was planning the future. They sounded like the words of a man who was taking stock of his life and making sure the people who mattered most to him knew exactly where they stood. Whether Elvis himself understood what was happening is something no one can know. But the conversation had the shape and the feeling of a final accounting, and it left Priscilla holding something she would carry for the rest of her life. Asbu, a burden to bear. Alone. When the calls stopped coming and the noise of the public grief began to settle, Priscilla was left with something that had no name and no clear place to put. The world had lost an icon. She had lost something more specific and more dear than that. Something that could not be explained in the terms that the rest of the world was using. And woven through all of it was the memory of that final phone call, sitting inside her like a stone that never got lighter no matter how much time passed. She had a daughter to raise. Lisa Marie was 9 years old when Elvis passed away, and the needs of a grieving child do not pause for the grief of a grieving mother. Priscilla turned her attention to Lisa Marie with a focus that was both genuine and, in every way, necessary. Caring for her daughter gave shape to days that might otherwise have collapsed under the weight of everything she was trying to hold. It gave her a sense of direction when direction was the one thing hardest to find. The public expected certain things from Priscilla. She was Elvis Presley's former wife, which meant that she occupied a particular role in the story the world was telling about his demise. There were appearances to make, words to say, a dignity to maintain on behalf of someone who could no longer speak for himself. She stepped into that role and carried it with a composure that people admired from the outside. What they could not see was what that composure was costing her. She threw herself into the work of preserving Elvis's legacy. Graceland was open to the public, and Priscilla was central to the effort of turning it into something that honored who he had been. This was not simply a business undertaking. It was a way of staying close to him, of keeping his story alive in a form that she could influence and protect. The work was demanding, and it kept her moving forward at a time when standing still would have been dangerous, even if it wasn't easy. But the phone call stayed with her. It was there in the mornings before the day took over, and it was there in the quiet that came after Lisa Marie had gone to sleep. The things Elvis had said that night did not fade the way ordinary memories fade. They stayed sharp and present, returning to her at unexpected moments with a force that could stop her mid-thought. She had not been able to share them with anyone, because sharing them would have meant exposing something that felt too raw and too sacred to bring into the open. Grief in public is a particular kind of performance. Priscilla understood this instinctively. She knew that the world wanted to see her sad but composed, devoted but not broken. She gave people what they needed to see while keeping the truest and most painful parts of her grief entirely to herself. This does not mean that she was being dishonest. It was the kind of careful protection that people build around their most private wounds when they know the world does not have the capacity to hold them gently. Years passed. Lisa Marie grew up. The world's relationship with Elvis evolved, and Priscilla remained at the center of efforts to shape and protect his image. She gave interviews, attended tribute events, and spoke publicly about Elvis in ways that were warm and measured. But she never spoke about what he had said the night before he passed away. There was a boundary around that part of her experience that she maintained with firmness for a very long time. People who knew Priscilla well understood that she was carrying something heavy. There is an aura to that kind of private grief that people close to a person can sense even when they cannot identify it. She was present and engaged in her life. She was building things and raising her daughter and doing the work that needed to be done. But somewhere beneath all of that, something had never been resolved. Something was still waiting for a place to land. The years had a way of softening some things and hardening others. The immediate pain of losing Elvis became something more complex over time, shaped by everything that came after. Watching Lisa Marie grow into adulthood, seeing the world's enduring love for Elvis, and navigating the challenges and losses that continued to come, all of it added new layers to what she was carrying. The phone call did not become less significant, if anything. It grew more so. There is a cost to keeping something that large inside for that long. It does not disappear. It simply waits. Priscilla moved through decades of public life as one of the most recognized women in the world, always connected to the story of Elvis Presley, always carrying her piece of its most private chapter. The words he had spoken to her on that final night were hers alone, and she was not yet ready to let them go. But the time would come when holding them alone would no longer be possible. The moment of truth. There are moments in a person's life when the thing they have been holding for the longest time simply becomes too heavy to carry alone any further. For Priscilla, that moment arrived in a setting that gave her no room to retreat. What happened was not planned. She had come prepared to do what she had done many times before, to speak about Elvis with warmth and composure, and the kind of measured love that the public had come to expect from her. But that day, things did not go according to the shape she had prepared for it. The occasion was significant. It was the kind of event that draws together everyone connected to Elvis's life and legacy. The sort of gathering where his memory is the center of everything, and where Priscilla is always, inevitably positioned near that center. She had attended these events for decades. She knew how to move through them, how to speak and when to hold back, how to be present without letting the full weight of her private history spill into the public space. She was good at it, but practice has its limits. She had been speaking for a while before it happened. She was describing Elvis, finding the words she had used before to capture who he was. The warmth, the complexity, the particular feeling of his presence when he was at his most unguarded. And then something shifted. She moved into territory that was different from the usual ground. She began speaking about the period just before his passing, about the man she had known in those final weeks, and the air in the room changed. The people watching her noticed it before she did. There was a change in her voice, a breaking that had not been there moments before. She was moving towards something that she had not spoken about in public before, and the audience could feel it. The room grew very still. Everyone present understood that what was about to happen was not part of the script she usually followed. Something real was surfacing, and there was nothing anyone could do to stop it. She spoke about the phone call, but she did not recount it in full, and she did not offer every detail. She began to describe the conversation, to give it shape and weight in front of people who had never heard it before. She spoke about the sound of Elvis's voice that night, and about the things he had said regarding their shared life and the people he loved. As she spoke, it became clear that this was not something she had decided to share. It was something that was coming out of her, whether she had decided or not. It just flowed naturally. Then she broke. Not the kind of collapse that looks performed or theatrical. It was quiet and sudden. The way real grief comes when it has been held back for a very long time. Her composure, which had held through so many public appearances and so many difficult years, simply gave way. The words stopped, and what replaced them was something that required no translation. Everyone in the room understood what they were witnessing. This was not Priscilla performing grief. This was Priscilla finally letting it be seen. The people around her responded with the kind of silence that means more than words. Nobody rushed to fill the space she had created. Nobody moved to redirect the moment or smooth it over with something easier. The room held still and let it be what it was. There is a particular kind of collective recognition that happens when a person who has carried something privately for a very long time finally lets it out in front of others, and the people in that room that day experienced it completely. Slowly, Priscilla recovered herself. The words came back, subtle and more careful. But they came back. She did not apologize for what had happened, and she did not try to reframe it or explain it away. She simply continued, more slowly than before, finishing what she had started. What she said before she broke and what she said after it were two different kinds of testimony. The first was shaped by years of practice. The second came from somewhere much older and much deeper than practice. For anyone who had watched Priscilla navigate the decades since Elvis's passing with such consistent composure, this moment was startling in the truest sense of the word. It revealed a depth of unresolved feeling that had been present all along beneath the surface of her public appearances, invisible until the moment it was not. The phone call she had carried alone for all those years had finally made itself heard, and the people who witnessed it would not forget what it felt like to be in the room when that happened. The event continued after she stepped back from the center of attention. The proceedings moved forward the way events always do. But the atmosphere had changed. Something had been said and seen that could not be unsaid or unseen. Priscilla had crossed a line that morning that she had held for decades. And, on the other side of it, something she had carried entirely alone for a very long time had become, at least in part, something shared. What remains is how the world chooses to deal with it. How Elvis's words affect the future. Time has a way of changing the meaning of things. What a person says in one moment can carry one thing, and then, years later, with everything that has happened in between, it can carry something else entirely. The words Elvis spoke to Priscilla the night before he passed away have moved through decades of grief and memory and public perception, and they have arrived in the present carrying more weight than they held on the night they were first spoken. understanding what they mean now requires understanding everything that has come after them. When Elvis passed away, the world built a story around him almost immediately. It was a story about talent and excess, about the price of fame and the tragedy of a life that burned too bright and too fast. That story wasn't wrong exactly, but it was incomplete. It was built from the outside, from the visible parts of Elvis's life, from the performances and the records, and the final difficult years. The private man at the center of all that noise was harder to reach, and most of what the world believed about him was shaped by what he had allowed to be seen. What Priscilla revealed about that final phone call cracks open a different version of Elvis. The man who spoke to her that night was not performing. He was not managing an image or playing a role. He was simply speaking from the interior of his own life to the person who had known him longest and most wholly. That version of Elvis, the one who spoke about regret and love and the things that had mattered most to him, is not the version that had been most visible to the world. But it may be the truest one. His words about Lisa Marie in particular carry a different kind of weight now. Lisa Marie lived with the loss of her father through her entire adult life, and that loss shaped her in ways that were visible to anyone who followed her story. She struggled and searched and carried the heavy burden of being Elvis Presley's daughter in a world that never let her forget it. Knowing that Elvis spent part of his final night speaking about her with such depth of feeling adds a layer to her story and to his that changes how both are understood. The way Elvis spoke to Priscilla that night also reframes their relationship in a significant way. Their marriage had always been discussed in terms of its difficulties, in terms of the pressures it was under, and the ways it ultimately could not survive them. The public narrative had never been particularly generous to the complexity of what they had shared, but the phone call reveals something that gets lost in the simpler version of their story. There was a genuine and enduring connection between them that outlasted the marriage itself and was still present in his final hours. For Priscilla herself, the act of finally speaking about that night changed something. Grief that is held entirely in private has a particular character. It is sealed, and because it is sealed, it can remain frozen. Speaking about the final conversation, even partially, even while breaking down in the middle of it, was an act of release that had been a long time coming. What she carried alone for all those years became something that existed between her and the world. And that shift, however small it might seem from the outside, matters a lot. There is also something important in the timing of when she finally spoke. Years of distance had not dimmed the memory or reduced its power. If anything, the passage of time had made it more concentrated, more significant, as everything that came after Elvis' passing continued to add context to what he had said. The deaths of people close to both of them. The struggles of those they had loved, the way the world had kept turning without him, all of it had continued to give those final words new dimensions that were not there on the night they were spoken. What Elvis said the night before he passed away also raises a difficult question about whether the people around him truly understood what was happening. He was unwell in ways that were obvious to those who knew him, and yet the machinery of his life continued moving forward as though everything was normal. Looking back through the lens of that final phone call, it becomes harder to avoid the sense that something more could have been done, that the signs were there, and that not enough people stopped to read them clearly. Thinking about it, his words to Priscilla were not a farewell. Now, he did not say that he was dying or that he would not see her again, but they had felt like a goodbye in the deepest sense, the kind where a person says everything they most needed to say and leaves nothing important unspoken. Whether Elvis knew on some level that he was approaching the end is something that cannot be answered with certainty. But the shape of what he chose to say that night suggests that some part of him understood that there was not much time left to say it.